So may I now call upon you, Rasigan Maharajh, to give some directions to the jury on what the issues are.
We've had a long day in terms of what's been shared with us. And there are quite a few very significant issues. But as we heard from the morning, we're dealing with very complex issues as well. And because of that, it calls for specialist language to describe things. But this is a specialist language of ourselves. You know, it's not something that we found and then we start representing it. We created the language. So we should also be able and capable of deciphering the language and taking back ownership of it. It's not just technical terms thrown at us. These are technical terms that come from our social engagement. And as we heard in the last comment as well, we're talking of a century of things taking place. Things have happened over time. So I just want to highlight maybe three aspects from the three cases that we've seen. Yeah, the one and a clear point that was made, and that's the non-binary nature of the climate transition itself. And because of that, yeah, it's very clear this short-termism that seems to be embedded in what we are doing needs a very serious rethink. And part and parcel of that rethink is how we understand how our governments, through the state, acts and how it affords certain privileges to particular institutions that the government supports. In this case, the Dutch government and ING itself. Yeah. You know, it's shocking when we heard from our colleagues in Cameroon, yeah, because this is a huge amount of wealth being transferred, that there's no ING in Cameroon. That there's no Dutch government in Cameroon. Yeah, when I searched on the internet, what I found was an honorary consul. Yeah. Yet that exploitative relationship still continues and is recognized as monies are transferred in and out of the territory itself. That's, I'm sure people have heard, it's a shadow form of financing. And I think all of us are particularly troubled by shadows. We need to be much clear about this. Yeah. You know, there's an odd saying from I think maybe 3 or 4 presidents of the United States of America that you can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Yeah. Unfortunately, where we are in terms of the ecology, it forces us to do both things. So even though we heard the comment being made that there are remedies that we need to seek, we need to also stop the practices that are accelerating us towards this precipice. Now, if nothing else from science, we know of a precautionary principle. And when we see the harm and we hear the evidence confirming the harm being perpetuated in our names through our institutions, I think it is a responsibility of us, yeah, as a cooperative and social species, to stand up for all the other species being affected by this. Yeah. In the Brazilian case, it was most clear because of the extensive nature of the presentation itself. You know, we are reproducing a racial capitalist political economy through what we are doing. None of us support that. Yeah. No one should support that. And we really need to act against these things. So even if, as we've heard, a small contribution to that is halting the practice and putting in place the necessary structural that will lead to infrastructural changes so that our institutions then serve us in building our resilience and our sustainability. So that's what I would encourage that we draw out of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I ask Nick Hildyard to summarize his thoughts and directions?
Thank you everyone. I'm an activist, and very often when confronting power, people will say, well, you know, what's your alternative? If we don't do this, what's your alternative? And I think like many other comrades around the world who are in the same position, I think my first question is always, well, whose alternative? Whose side are you on? Because there isn't one alternative to anything. Justice requires us to take sides and be very clear on whose side we operate. So in this instance, in this court, I think if we're to do justice, the statute asks us to be on the side of those who uphold not just the right to survival, as Angelica points out, the collective right of all to survival, not just the right of a few to survive. But more than that, it demands that we uphold the conditions that allow life. That's a much bigger task for all of us. I think we're on the side of those who would ensure that those who challenge the powerful, who challenge and question the owner of a plantation that is damaging, that they do not have to go to bed each night, as Emmanuel does, and told us, worrying whether they'll even get to their homes at night without being assassinated or picked up by the police. So I think, we have pointers to whose side we have to be on. And I think this particular statute sets up not just, doesn't just make it a crime to act in a particular way, to take an action that undermines life. It also criminalizes inaction to protect life. Omissions are as important as commissions. I think that's important. Standing on the sidelines, not taking a side, is taking a side. And it's in taking a side often on the side of injustice. So, what struck me today, and particularly with the role of the Dutch state in all of this, is just how, the prosecutors set out very clearly how the Dutch state has taken certain actions that have undermined our collective right to survival, not least by unleashing finance, not for the public good, but unleashing finance for the sake of finance and for the profit of finance and for the profit of individuals, by privatizing ING in the first place, by stripping away pension funds that could be used to actually put us onto a different trajectory. But I've been struck throughout by the choices that the Dutch government's made and ING have made, deliberate choices. In ING's case, deliberate choices to invest where impunity and where environmental crime are allowed and permitted in a way that enables profit-making. But with the Dutch government, they sat on the fence, even when it has become clear that coal production, coal-fired power stations, which they have known to be destructive for years, they have stood by and not banned investments by Dutch companies in coal, something they could have done. They stood by even after having stripped away the regulations on companies that would have required them to obey environmental and social regulations. Even after they've allowed those regulations to be replaced by voluntary codes of conduct, like the Equator Principles, even after it's become clear that those voluntary codes of conduct are completely inadequate to hold companies like ING to account, they have done nothing. They have not instituted the controls that they could have and should have instituted. So it's the omissions as much as the commissions that I think we should reflect on when we take a judgment. And I would, as a judge, and I have this privilege, direct the jury to do precisely that.
Thank you very much. Would you like to? Yeah.
I don't want to say too much, but I'd like to thank the prosecutor today for making a very clear case at the beginning of the day so that we could focus our minds on what we needed to think about. I just wanted to make one small comment about this process of looking at intergenerational climate crimes and intergenerational knowledge. If you know, I've been sitting here, Radha's been standing here. In my law, in my Cree law where I come from, I'm an Indigenous person, we never go in this direction when asking people to speak. We only do that once. And that's when somebody has passed over. You start on this side and you go in that direction. So all day I have been resisting speaking first, out of our own legal system. So you saw it in practice today. And the reason I raised that is because some questions have arisen about this tribunal and what the court is doing and what potentially could happen in the future. I have been involved in these kind of things for more than 40 years. So I'm kind of an old person. So I speak from experience. In 1977, we went to the United Nations in Geneva, and we said, we're still Indigenous peoples, we're still alive. People were surprised to see us. We had people hanging out of the building at the UN going looking at us, people coming up and touching us, feeling our hair, and they just couldn't believe we were still here. We were not really recognized. So then we had another meeting here in Rotterdam on the rights of Indigenous peoples in the Americas, 1980, 81. Then we had another meeting in Geneva, again, pushing the rights of Indigenous peoples. And now, you have a Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, 2009. It took us to 2009 to do that. But what I'm saying to you is that what you're hearing here today, or yesterday, and maybe tomorrow, you think, well, why am I even involved? Because it's going to be a long time. Something that might take a long time to do. Yes, we know that. But colonization did not happen overnight. And to get out of this mess, it's not going to happen overnight. And I always tell our own people, and I talk quite often to our own people, especially our young people, and I always tell them, there's no instant pudding solutions here, people. As when you identify the issue, and you work on the issue, you work on it until it gets done. Then you get onto another issue, or you divide the work amongst many people to work on different issues. But this is to expose the issues that are confronting us, but also confronting you who live inside of a state that has allowed this to happen. So we need to figure out how we're going to do this together, collectively, and also individually, because each individual can do something. It doesn't matter how small or how big it is, you can do it. And so, I commend you for coming and staying and listening to us, listening to the people, but, think about it in the longer term, because for us, I'm talking about my own people, we don't see anything as being important to me. It's got nothing to do with me. My responsibility is to the 7th generation from now, the ones that I don't even know. That's who I'm thinking about. And that takes it out of my being and my franticness that I didn't get anything done in the last 70 odd years of my life here on the earth. It leaves it, I left something for the future. I didn't give up the future. And I think that's what I heard from all of the three speakers today. Even though as desperate as they are in the situation that they are in, they're still thinking about the future. How can they rectify what's going on now? And I think that's what they're asking you to do, is to help them to recognize that, so that this what we're doing here means something not only to you, but to them. So that's why, I would say to the members here, think about that when you're being asked the question, whatever the question is today. I'm not sure what the question is today, but whatever it is, think about it seriously, and thank you very much. Hi.
Thank you very much for that summary. As my direction and in my concluding observations, I won't go into the evidence and what witnesses have said. You have seen it. Other judges have commented on it. The prosecutor has spoken to it. So I won't say anything more. I just want to draw your attention to the statute itself and what is climate crime. And climate crime is, and I want to refer to section 2(1)(d), E, and F. Yeah? Ecological conditions necessary for reproduction of different species. So anything that destroys the condition for species to reproduce and live their lives is a climate crime, falls within the definition of a climate crime. Socio-ecological conditions necessary to sustain reciprocal relationships between humans and non-humans. So anything that destroys our relationships to other species, to the plant world, the forest world, to the water world, to the other world, it also constitutes crime. Social conditions necessary for survival of human societies and cultures, that constitutes crime. And therefore, and if you look at the Intergenerational Climate Crime, section 3(1)(d), acts of commission or omission in the past or present that displaced people from places, fragment or fragmented communities, and destroy and destroyed cultures. Today we saw that everywhere this has become an issue. People are being displaced. They don't have a ground to stand on, and that is a crime. You cannot displace people. You cannot deny an animal the right to go to a river and drink water. You cannot, and when you do that, that is a criminal act. Throwing people out of land is a criminal act. There is no law that is existing outside of this court that recognizes displacing people, displacing animals from their food and their water resources as a crime. And I say this because some of you are probably asking, why don't we go to the Dutch court? Why don't we go to, I don't know, some other international court? And the answer is very simple. Those courts do not recognize life as a given condition that the law must recognize. Not the right to life, but that living is foundation of anything really. Because if there is no life, there is nothing else. And that is why removing people from land, removing animals, plants, birds, denying them their modes of survival. So what this court wants you to focus on is what are the conditions that are necessary to live. And if those conditions are destroyed, that constitutes an intergenerational climate crime. So it's using that standard that I now call upon you to cast your vote as members of the jury. So all of you, those of you who think ING has committed intergenerational climate crimes in Brazil, in Cameroon, in Indonesia, could you please raise your hands? Thank you very much. I think we have a very clear vote on that, affirmation of guilty. Those of you who think that the Dutch government is complicit in allowing and enabling and facilitating ING to do what it does, could you please put your hands up? Thank you very much. I think that's a very, very clear mandate from the jury. We will now take away your views and we will try and put together our discussions and deliberations today in some form of judgment, which will be available very shortly, and we will be and you will know about it when it is out. Thank you very much for your contributions today.